honestly, the technicalities of the digital marketing thing, like all of its like, domain knowledge, that isn't really all that important because it changes really, really quickly. What I wish I had understood on a more kind of like deeper mechanical basis when I started was just exactly how all of the financial and kind of operational levers work within the company so that we could have maybe avoided some of the more expensive mistakes that we made along the way.
Hey everybody, I'm Kevin Newsom. I'm the head of community at Triple Whale, and welcome to Whale Sightings. I'm super excited today to welcome in Shinn. Aaron's the latest entrepreneur to take the plunge and have a conversation with us a little bit about his business, which is August Uncommon Teas. Aaron, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So where are you located?
I'm based in Los Angeles.
That is a long way from Parsons. I told Aaron when I booked this interview, for whatever reason, I keep landing guests from Parsons. So maybe I should just send those guys a postcard or something and say thanks, because you guys are all over the place and all of you are killing it.
That is wild.
So I was reading your story, and you told me one of the things that you mentioned, was that you guys. How many, I'm just going to take a broad guess here. How many tea companies start in a pub?
Oh man, I would probably expect one. It's really just not, I mean, granted, I don't know a million founder stories about tea companies, but I don't think that, drinking was necessarily the start of any of the other ones.
Well, I remember, this is just an odd note, but like a lot of craft brewers are like former science students, and so it's like you see common threads there. But when I read your story and you guys were talking about how, well, basically we were in a pub in Wicker Park, and I was like, what is happening? How do you end up at tea from this? That's a long journey, but it sounds like really that's where the beginning of your conversation about flavor began.
Yeah, I think that's right on. We were, and when I say we, I mean my co-founder Gina and myself were in, actually much after when we met and connected in Chicago, we're in the Bay Area kind of at the birth of the craft cocktail movement and the birth of the craft coffee movement back when Blue Bottle was a push cart. And, craft cocktails were really just getting going. And so we saw this like huge explosion of interest in beverage in all sorts of other categories. And, years later, we kind of looked at each other and we said, why hasn't this happened for tea yet? And that kind of like light bulb going on was a big part of why we started August.
Well, and it sounded to me like, I'm reading between the lines here, so tell me if I'm completely insane, but it sounded like part of what you guys were extracting from that conversation was the idea that tea is only born of tradition, mm-hmm. and could also be like, sort of a like more flavor forward just in terms of the experience.
Fully. Yeah. And also it's such a dusty category. Like tea is so kind of, I don't know, it feels very backward looking and very much about the past and about tradition and about where it's from. And most tea companies don't seem to be thinking a lot about like the way people live now. And there's a lot of amazing tea tradition out there, but we really wanted to make August for, just the way people live now and make it about the here and now and not really be so backward looking. I have in the kind of intervening years, I did a ton of user research. I was at IDEO for 6 years, which is very like human-centered design consultancy. And a lot of my time there was actually like spending time in people's living rooms and interviewing them and just learning about what their lives are like. And so it really kind of showed me that like everyday life is not like crazy tea ceremonies and like, crazy complicated rituals and stuff. It's very, very basic, but it also has to be satisfying in some way. So that's kind of part of what we were trying to do, is to make something that's really accessible, but also awesome.
Well, and there's really, to your point, like there's really no substitute for just having those conversations, like actually sitting with people and letting them speak, like having like talk in their own words about essentially where the rubber meets the road in their lives. And if they're, and it is fascinating to me that tea is such a enduring tradition in different pockets of the world. Like it's just, people don't even take it, like it's kind of de facto ritual. But in this case, the idea that tea could be something a little bit more, not necessarily bespoke, but something a little bit more of a special occasion opportunity, I think is really interesting. Here's the question that when I started thinking to myself, like the things that I wanted to ask you, this was the one that bubbled up, no pun intended. And so I didn't do that on purpose. So the gist is, with a lot of products, like, coffee, certainly, pizza, sushi, I'm thinking of consumables in particular, but it's like one of the terms that I sort of threw around back in the day was the idea that there's sort of a like little mafia or cabal of each, and they have very, very strong opinions. So my question is there a tea mafia, so to speak?
Definitely. But they're not, it's composed of a bunch of individuals that are all kind of like doing their own thing. And it's not like, a organized mob that like, shakes its finger at you and they're like, you're doing this wrong. And like there's definitely like a prominent, like there are a lot of people who are very traditional and very kind of like, like they have a very specific idea of what quality and what doing it right is. And like, that's cool. That's totally awesome for them. And that's, we're totally not mad at that. I mean, there's a lot of orthodoxy in coffee also. And like the coffee orthodoxy also kind of gets transferred to tea a little bit. Some people believe that like only good teas are single origin teas and that, blending tea is a sign of like low quality. And we just are totally not, we don't believe in any of that stuff. But, not that there isn't a grain of truth in it. Not that there isn't amazing single origin tea out there. Absolutely is. But, we just wanted to do something that had a little bit more of a kind of creative and kind of exciting edge to it. And you just can't get there using strictly orthodox means.
Well, and I would imagine, too, that if you're using strictly orthodox means, then the only type of tea you're ever going to have is the type that you've already had. I tell this story. So speaking of San Francisco, so I worked for Yelp for a really long time. And so one of the stories that I tell sometimes is that once back in the day, given a choice of going to a restaurant, I would always choose a restaurant that I already knew and order something I'd already had. And now and forevermore, it will always be the opposite. I'll go someplace I've never had and try something I've never had before. So do you, using that sort of loose analogy, like, do you feel like there's kind of are there some folks in the tea world who have an adventurous mindset?
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. And but the other thing is there are a million gazillion people on earth who are also, we call them tea curious, I guess, like people who haven't yet really experimented with tea, but are just kind of like wondering, like they want to dip their toe in the water and find a safe and kind of exciting way to do it. And I think for a lot of the new folks, there are kind of no limits except for, what makes them happy, like what tastes good to them. But then, that's I think that there's a big range out there, and everybody, especially people who are like the most seasoned tea drinkers tend to kind of want to taste a better version of something they've already had before. So like if you're a person who has had a wonderful first experience with Earl Grey and you've had 50 different Earl Greys, like maybe you're always looking to upgrade to the next better Earl Grey.
Right.
I think there is also this kind of, there's an effect that I've heard about called first contact effect, where like when you eat at your very first Mexican restaurant in your life, that becomes the yardstick that you measure every Mexican restaurant by. And sometimes people will kind of end up chasing that first contact experience, kind of trying to repeat the same thing over and over again to hit a peak that they've hit in the past. And, sometimes that's part of the fun of hunting for sensory experiences, is just trying to find that thing that like took you to a magical place once.
So that actually brings up a really good point. And I think, Mexican restaurants are a great analogy you could say the same thing. I'm in Texas. Like you could say the same thing with barbecue joints. It's like a lot of time there's an inverse relationship between like sort of how tiny and boutique and like sort of small the operation is and how exemplary the experience is. Now, it's totally unscientific, but it seems like that's kind of the broad swath of feedback. Do you guys, you know, your site's beautiful. Like it looks like it's a really, really smartly put together, which makes sense given your background. But I mean, is there a conscious relationship between not necessarily being boutique, but being careful about the way that you present yourself to the public and the sort of intake that you're getting in feedback?
Yeah, that one we're constantly trying to adjust. And I think our tendency being that, I'm a pretty verbose person. My partner, Gina, is she's a former French professor. She's a former academic. I mean, we're people who love language and love to have conversations and tell stories. And especially as a direct-to-consumer brand, it's really easy to overwhelm people with too much information, too much text, too much storytelling. And it's really critical for us to kind of be measured in the language we use and be accessible and inclusive. And so we're always kind of prototyping different ways of telling our story so that we can kind of be as effective as possible and kind of get our story communicated in a really kind of quick and accessible way. But coming back to the question of boutiquiness, it's funny. Like I also, in my background, was once at a fashion publisher that was like really super, super luxury, like crazy high end stuff. And, like that's kind of part of my aesthetic background. Like I just love like beautiful, minimal, kind of artfully put together, designy stuff. And that doesn't really not everything has to look that way. That's something I'm kind of gradually learning.
Sure.
And, so part of our challenge again is to like kind of get over ourselves a little bit so that we can, communicate to our customers in a way that they understand.
Well, and then I think that probably also speaks to the accessibility that you're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. Like if I'm among the tea curious crowd and I'm trying to figure out whether, this doesn't necessarily fit into a again, pardon the pun, predetermined box. Like, if I'm trying to figure out if there's a place for me in the tea world, all the more reason that you want it to be as comfortable and experience as you can get. So that totally scans. That's really interesting. Now, you guys have also talk a little bit about okay, so you've found your passion, you're ready to spin up this direct to consumer business. You think you have a pretty good idea who your audience is. How do you get started putting the word out there? These parts of the origin story are always really interesting to me. Like, how did you guys get to a place where, is this a friends and family thing? Like, how did you start to take the temperature?
Fortunately in the early days, this was a side hustle for me. And I was a design consultant after IDEO, independently. And then I eventually was, full-time on a project, actually a tech startup, with a couple other people. And so that was kind of running along, kind of helped create a little bit of a cushion while we first, figured it out. But it took a long time. That's the reason why I said that, for it to kind of click and start growing on its own. So in the very beginning, it was friends and family. We found a friendly PR agent that gave us a really reduced rates. And we got into the New York Times 3 months after launch, which was cool.
Oh, wow.
But also not 0 to 100, hockey stick growth forever. It was a cool blip and it's a great press hit, but still, it was just the beginning of things really. So we started trying all these different sales channels and we thought, okay, we're going to do great at really high end boutiques. So we started getting into fancy homeware stores and going through interior design companies and trying that route. We tried getting into some really high end restaurants. We did that, but had a lot of trouble kind of reaching anything that was scalable. We always had the direct to consumer side of the business there to kind of catch interest. And that was always kind of what we thought would be the first real growth channel. But it wasn't until we were on our third attempt to run social media marketing that like paid social finally clicked for us. We started with one agency. It was total abject failure. Then we tried to run it ourselves. That was an abject failure. And then finally the third group that we worked with, like it hit. And between 2018 and 2020, we grew over 10x.
Oh my God. Wow.
Which was exhausting and crazy. And we went from like 2 people in our, with basically like 1 part-time employee in like a tiny warehouse to like at the peak having like 16 people in 3 warehouses. And it like, it was a wild ride.
So let me ask you this. So let's unpack that a little bit, because I think when people hear like swing and a miss, 10x and everything changes, like there's a light bulb that goes on there, without giving away anything proprietary, like and understanding that part of the equation was like we just found the right folks who really got our brand and were able to do something with it. Like, what changed for you guys? Was it the marketing mix? Were there certain channels that you found really resonated? Like what'd you guys do?
It was most like the biggest part was the getting like Facebook and Instagram working well as an acquisition channel. We really didn't understand, like when we started, I have no digital marketing background before August, and like just understanding all the mechanics of the digital customer journey and all the touch points that the customer has along the way, figuring out the kind of very concise language that we would need to kind of let people know what we're doing in the context of a social media feed, like all of those like little things that digital marketers know very, very well. I had to kind of learn step by step on the job. And once it was really Facebook and Instagram that worked for us, that kind of got us to that scale. And then, iOS 14 happened and that really changed everything in 2021. But that was the kind of the front end part of, building the business. And then the back end part was just having our email automations and everything like that built on, as well as scaling up our customer service organization, which is really super key.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it sounds like obviously there are a lot of surprises that happen when you guys grow that rapidly, just logistically, things that you have to do.
Yeah, I didn't even mention inventory. I mean, that was its own and production and all that. Because we're a manufacturer. So
sure.
It's not like we're a digital product and like we just have to allocate more server space, or we have to actually like make more product and make it faster and, be able to, satisfy many, many, many more people.
And you are, and you guys are traditionally or mostly shipping in the US, is it all over?
We're all 100% US at this point.
Okay, cool. And then how much retail business are you doing these days? Is that still part of your mix, or?
It's tiny. Like it's really boutique. Yeah. We have a small wholesale program, but probably 90% of August is the direct to consumer side.
Makes sense. Okay. So I'll ask, this is always one of these questions that it's like, it percolates around in here, and then it's like I get off the call and I'm like, oh, I should have remembered to ask. So if someone is out there and starting something that they're passionate about, and it could be, not necessarily in your space or your adjacent space, but like, what do you wish that you knew at the beginning, other than digital marketing?
That's what I was going to choose.
Okay.
That's I think honestly the technicalities of the digital marketing thing, like all of its like, domain knowledge, that isn't really all that important because it changes really, really quickly. What I wish I had understood on a more kind of deeper mechanical basis when I started was just exactly how all of the kind of, all of the financial and kind of operational levers work within the company, so that we could have maybe avoided some of the more expensive mistakes that we made along the way. Because it's always a struggle, especially when you're growing, to stay profitable, and especially when you're producing a product and when you have a very inexpensive product like we do. So it's been, there are a lot of lessons that I wish I could have had. So definitely, if you're just starting out, just make sure you have your numbers, dialed before you start dumping cash down the marketing chute.
I think I know the answer to this, but pandemic, better or worse for you guys?
A little bit of both, actually. So 2020
okay.
was a year of crazy growth. 2021, kind of continuing pandemic, was a super, super challenge. And, I think 2020 was a little bit more like exuberant for everybody. Like everybody bought everything on the whole internet in 2020. I mean, I don't know anybody who was selling online in 2020 who didn't grow wildly.
Right.
And then maintaining that in 2021 when, the pandemic just drags on and on and on. And there are also platform changes and people get burnt out on social media and like all of this stuff made 2021 a lot more challenging. And now, 2022 is like, we're not trying to maintain that anymore. We're just like, you know what, we're just going to let the business be exactly the size that it needs to be and not just chase growth for growth's sake. We're not a VC funded company or family owned. And we just need it to, August just needs to be whatever it needs to be. It doesn't need to be an arbitrary size.
What's the nicest compliment you guys have gotten from somebody outside of the New York Times or any of that?
Yeah, no, that stuff's cool. But the thing that really keeps us going is that people write to us to tell us how the tea makes them feel and how it can, people have actually written to us to tell us that in some cases our tea has helped them through tough times in their lives. Or
that's nice.
A little kind of beacon of sanity in a storm, or a moment of pleasure in very difficult slog. And that's just unbelievable. I mean, when we started the company, we kept pinching ourselves. We're making a product that people put in their bodies, which is I've never worked in food service or in prior to August. And so that's a very novel experience for me. And that level of trust and intimacy is extraordinary. I still remember every day that that's kind of part of what I do. And, giving people when we hear that story told back to us that, that they kind of, took that, they gave us that trust and that they were repaid in having a great experience. It's so satisfying and so validating.
That's got to be really gratifying. Okay. So here's we don't really do rapid fire questions on this show other than whatever comes off the top of my head, but I'm going to throw out some flavors of your tea and I want you to just riff and tell me about them a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. All right. So, Psycho Candy.
Top selling herbal tea that we make. It's all pumpkin, no spice is the joke.
Okay.
But so it's kind of a riff on the pumpkin spice latte flavor, but with no cinnamon or cloves or anything like that. It's just super rich, caramelly, pumpkin-y rooibos. It's delightful.
And not seasonal. That's something you guys sell all year round.
All year round. Yeah. I mean, it definitely moves the most in the fall, but people who are into it are into it.
Silencio
is more of a sleeper, but so that one's kind of Cuban cigar vibes.
Oh, that's cool. So
but it's actually more of that kind of sweet cigar wrapper aroma, not the stinky foot burning cigar flavor at all. It's actually pineapple, black pepper, black tea. Which is really
interesting.
Kind of delightful. And if you brew it like a chai, where you infuse it for a long time, that pepper really comes forward and it's super spicy and sweet.
That's really fascinating. Yeah, no, some of these I'm just going to have to experience in order to figure it out. But am I saying this right? Biarritz, yeah.
That's a total evening favorite, almost cocktail hour favorite when I'm not looking for alcohol. It's got a very kind of, it's another rooibos tea. It's caffeine free and it's got a kind of boozy liqueur kind of flavor to it. It's got almond, orange blossom, and anise in it. And anise is kind of a polarizing ingredient. Some people have licorice trauma and they're no anise.
Oh, right.
But for me, I think it's such an intriguing kind of refreshing kind of herbal flavor, herbaceous flavor. And it really is, that one's just amazing. It's one of my all-time favorites.
And last one that I'll ask you about is Passage.
Yeah, Passage. So
Passage. Okay, yeah, sorry.
It used to have a
That's
long
the one I
name.
tripped on. Yeah.
It used to have a longer name. It used to be called Passage du Désir. It's named after an arcade in Paris, like one of these covered shopping streets. And it's kind of that one's all inspired by morning smells of Paris, like because there's this amazing bakery culture in Paris where, there are bakeries everywhere. And if you were walking around at like 5 a.m., you're going to smell all of the croissants baking. And, it's just kind of like part of the kind of culinary fabric of the city. So, but that particular tea is a chocolate hazelnut black tea. And it's very kind of rich and decadent and, very much inspired by Gina's time when she was doing her master's degree in Paris.
Makes sense. And then how do you guys do your research? Like, is it predicated upon having spent special time in Paris and other places?
So
the general impression that I get and continue to get is that you're with the idea of blended tea or with some of these special tea concoctions that you guys are putting together. The idea is to like sort of, surprise and delight. It's stayed, tired, like imagination. And so to that end, like, I guess this is my roundabout way of asking, like, okay, how do you find your inspiration? And then I would love to also know as a White House style follow-up, like, can you tell me about a tea that you guys haven't rolled out yet that you're excited to share?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So inspiration is, I have to tell you first that Gina is the flavor boss over here. And she's one of these people that has a kind of like supernatural degree of sense memory. So when she's in the blending process, she can actually kind of almost like picture the way the flavors are going to go together with a kind of uncanny degree of accuracy before actually tasting something. So she's just kind of a freak in that way. If I try to do it, it's like not nearly on the level that she produces. But in any case, inspiration comes from all sorts of different places. One of our teas, Dark Iris, is based off of a dessert that we had in a restaurant in Barcelona that was like, that had this really unconventional combination of white peach stracciatella cheese, like that, like ultra thin, like soft,
interesting
lime oil. And those three things together were such a uncommon kind of like flavor combination, texture, aroma thing that turned into Dark Iris, which is an oolong with peach, pistachio, and lime. And it's like Gina kind of translated that sensory experience into a tea. And so there are a lot of cases where that, there was something like that, where there was some kind of direct point of inspiration. But then there are also times where it's much more kind of open-ended. Like we have teas that are inspired by films and albums, and sometimes it's very intuitive. So we tend to do a lot of development where we don't actually roll out like the thing that we work on. We probably make 10 teas for every one that we release. And a lot of it comes down to a tasting. It's like, have we tasted this before? Is this something that we want to taste again and again and again and again? And that is, there's always partially a calculated risk and partially just gut feeling like, we need to have this in the world. So we don't actually do any kind of like test marketing with our teas before they're in production. We just kind of, I wouldn't say we shoot from the hip because there's a lot of kind of experience and, a lot of kind of personal conviction that
makes sense. Yeah.
But nonetheless, it still is like, we don't actually put them in front of test users until they're definitely going to market. Yeah. So that's a little bit about kind of like how the flavor side of the business comes together.
Yeah, no, totally. Super interesting. I guess we won't spend the rest of it. We'll give you some of your day back. But before we do that, like anything else that you guys are bullish about or that you're interested in trying on the marketing side that you like, how much experimentation do you do over there?
We're actually kind of like constantly fiddling and testing new ideas. And I wish we could go 10 times faster than we go in terms of like putting new ideas out there. But I mean, right now our marketing team is very, very small, and, it's mostly me and Gina, with a couple of people helping us out. So, we only have so much bandwidth to make new creative and test new ideas and get stuff out there. But nonetheless, like there's a fat list of ideas that we haven't really tested yet. And, it's always exciting to kind of get things out there and see what happens.
Totally makes sense. Well, listen, I have to tell you, what a interesting conversation. Thank you so much for sharing some insight into your company and your journey. And I'm really excited what you guys do next. Aaron, thank you again. And everybody, if people want to find you, they should definitely check out August Uncommon Teas on the web. Any other place that you're flying your flag, so to speak, that folks can reach out?
Yeah, I mean, the web's probably the best. I mean, we have live chat on all the time, and our customer service folks are like super passionate and knowledgeable and love to help people find what they need. We're also kind of starting to spend a little bit more time showing up on TikTok, and of course, we're also on Instagram and Facebook. So we're around, and of course, like there aren't a lot of people talking about tea on Twitter, but we're there too. So we just try to be easy to reach.
Awesome. Well, listen, thank you again for sharing, Aaron from August Uncommon Teas. See you guys next time on Whale Sightings.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.